So when I started doing film study on high level MMA, but really any MMA, what I started to realize was directionally, I was realizing that the distance was very different and the defense was very different and the combos were outrageously different. What do I mean by that? Boxing distance and Muay Thai distance are pretty close. They're different in their own ways, but it's a similar kind of range. Part of that is the rule set. Part of that is what gets scored the most. Um, Boxing, there's no leg kicks, so you can't stay inside as much, or you can stay inside more without worrying about your base. Muay Thai, you're always picking up your leg, looking for that check because of the leg kicks. And in Thailand, punches aren't scored as heavily as kicks, so they prioritize those leg kicks and those return leg kicks. So that kind of dictates the distance and the timing. And it also changes the way that you play defense, right? But when you think about this distance thing, your Muay Thai and your boxing fighters, they love fighting on that inside space. Even if you're not an inside fighter in boxing, you still play at a much closer space than an MMA striker, especially with MMA sized gloves. Now you step one pace back, and now you're at kickboxing range. And the kickboxing range, I think that the kickboxers do better in MMA than the Muay Thai fighters and really the boxers because they are already at an almost MMA range because of the way that the scoring and um, the rule set works. It's closer to the MMA striking rule set than Muay Thai. And what I mean by that, I mean you can't in MMA. It's really hard to just stay in super tight. Your clinch either turns into wrestling or you just exit back into your striking range. Muay Thai, you play on that inside and you work on your trips and your off balances a lot more. So it's a different range. The kickboxing range and the kickboxing strikes look more similar to MMA striking than Muay Thai and really boxing does. Um, so when you go out to MMA, there's a bunch of things that combine to change the striking overall from any of those sports. Obviously, you take a lot of the elements from everything else, but it looks quite a bit different. Your distance is so much farther. When boxers and Muay Thai fighters and kickbox fighters get into MMA or do MMA sparring, they have to adjust to that distance. You're moving a lot more. You don't have these big gloves to rely on your defense with anymore. You've got to play a lot more of an active guard, whether that's parrying, long jabs, long guards, your movements. Your head's got to be moving a lot more because you can't just keep a high guard and expect it to work. There are ways to make high guard work in MMA. Peter Yan's figured it out. Ilya kind of figured it out. He plays a hybrid, but you do have to adjust for the way that you play your defense and your distance. Distance is your number one defensive tactic instead of your guard, right? Versus the other ones is generally your high guards because you've got these big protectors there. So that's just kind of how it's a little bit different just from a distance and guard perspective. But what you also realize is the combos are totally different. And what do I mean by that? Getting off a three-piece combo is insane in MMA. Some people want to blame it on, oh, it's because MMA guys aren't that good at striking. No, a lot of really good strikers come into MMA and they still only throw 1 to 3 pieces because of what we just talked about, which is the distance and the guard. You can't sit in the pocket and wait for your returns, which is what a lot of your combos, your traditional combos, are built off of, is being able to stay in there and your opponent being willing to stay in there and trade with you. So, for example, if you go to, at the time that I analyzed it, I have a template that I use to analyze fights strike by strike, who threw what. I'll put a little blurb of it right here. But it goes who initiated contact, how many strikes did they throw, did the other guy counter? If so, how many strikes did he throw, and exactly what strikes he threw. Did he throw a jab straight? Did he throw a calf kick? Did he counter with a 3? Right? And helps all of this helps us analyze these fights because I now know your tendencies, and I do it by round. So I know how you shift your tendencies round by round. And I can get a good feel for overall what you actually like to throw. If I've got 3 fights worth of film on you, I can pretty much build a good tendency list, and we're going to build a little bit of a game plan off of it. How does that lead me to figure out how different MMA striking is? Well, when I went, and at the time, again, I analyzed what was the highest volume striking MMA fight of all time. At the time, I think it was Max versus Calvin Kattar. There were I want to say somewhere between maybe it was on the, it's been a couple years since I analyzed it, but it was on the range of 5 to 10, maybe low double digits, maybe 12 strike combinations that were longer than a 3-piece in a 25-minute fight that at the time was the highest volume striking fight of all time. Max broke the striking volume record in that fight and still only threw mostly 1 and 2, maybe 3-piece combos. So that's just to put it in perspective, how if you're training these super long combos, what you think you're doing is you think that you are learning how to string sort of these movements together, which is somewhat true. But what we do instead is we play kind of like with the grappling, we play these small-sided games where it's broken down by the actual skill that we are trying to build. So let's say I'm trying to walk a guy into the cage and I'm trying to cut him off, right? When we make that into a game, the guy with his back to the wall cannot throw any real strikes. He's really just trying to set up his escapes, and the guy that's got the center is trying to back him down. He's trying to back the opponent down until he's within about 3 feet of the cage, and then he's working on taking his shots or setting up his final blow, right? So it looks a little different depending on what skill we're trying to build, but the point is that we're trying to build the skills, and then the techniques come out of it later, which we will drill because we do pads at least once a week, instead of drilling a bunch of 7 to 10 piece combos and then expecting the skills to fall out of that, right? And I know that it works because I got guys like Logan, one of my guys, he just graduated high school. He'd never basically thrown a punch in his life, and in his first 10 months of training, he went from 0 to 2 wins, one by a knockdown at the end of the fight that was basically a KO, and a stone-cold walk-off KO in his next one. Doing essentially almost no long combinations on pads, just building the skills and the base MMA striking that you need, which is, again, focusing on your distance management, your crisp technique, and focusing on getting really good at the very few strikes that are really thrown in MMA, and being able to understand that they're going to throw some other stuff at you, but that's not what we're focusing on. You need to focus in MMA on a very different skill set than in boxing, Muay Thai, or kickboxing, or the grappling arts as well, but that's a different conversation. We're just dealing with the striking right now. But again, here's a little bit of here's some homework. You can go watch the Max versus Kattar fight, or you can go watch Max versus Justin. That fight also only had a handful of actual combos longer than 3 pieces. There were a couple of flurries in there where it's like, if you were coaching that guy on the pads, would you tell him to throw that combo, or is that they both just got into a firefight and they're just chucking bombs, right? Which is how Justin ended up losing in the last second, but gave us one of the most entertaining fights of all time. The point is, you can go look at all of these high volume fights. Go look at Izzy fights. Go look at Max fights. Go look at Conor fights. Who else? Go look at Jose Aldo fights. You can go look at all of these fights, and very rarely are you actually going to see more than 2 or 3 combos longer than 2 or 3 punches in any single round. Down in the comments, you can argue with me, but I want you to actually give me some fights where the large majority of the damaging blows were from long combos and not from 1s, 2s, or 3-piece combos. There's your homework. If you want to argue with me, go ahead down in the comments. But you better bring some evidence, because I've done a lot of film study over a lot of years on hundreds of fights, and that's the conclusion I've came to. Chill out on the long combos and focus on the skills.